still very much up in the air about who will go where, but one that seems almost definite is Kai Havertz. Declan Rice looked like he was on his way to Arsenal, very close to it, until Manchester City intervened. You heard it here first, right? And also Jurrien Timber as well has been linked too, who, again, linked heavily to Manchester United last season. Very sort of dependable, solid-looking centre-back alternative for them. So how do you think it's going to play out for Arsenal? Who do you think they prioritise out of them? And what is the likelihood of them landing any of them, would you say?
Well, I think 2 of the 3 are pretty much done now. I think we'll see Havertz and Timber there next season, which is they're excellent additions for the Arsenal squad. It's where they kind of fit in, because Arsenal certainly need depth in their defence. We know that. But is Timber the kind of player that's happy to be depth, or is he a starter? I wonder who he kind of replaces if he is, because he's very versatile and can play across the back line at fullback and centre-back, and also can play in a holding midfield. So there's a chance that maybe he's their answer to Thomas Partey moving on as well. I think Arteta has been quite smart at trying to bring players into the squad that can cover a variety of positions, because then all they need to do is consistently train within that system, and they will be able to fit in a bit more in that kind of total football style. So Timber makes a lot of sense. That'll be done pretty soon. And Havertz looks like that's pretty much nailed on now, doesn't it? And I think that's the more interesting of the signings, because Declan Rice would be exciting, but it makes a lot of sense. You know, obviously, where he goes into this Arsenal team. Whereas Havertz, it takes a bit more tweaking. And I think actually that's probably what Arteta's got in mind for it.
Thinking about Havertz as well, I think he's had his medical today, I think, from what I hear. So the announcement's imminent. I mean, Arsenal's attack has been really predictable this season, but in a good way, because they've all performed so well. Can you see him replacing the likes of Gabriel Jesus, maybe? Do you think that's the kind of role they'll play for him? Because, I mean, he has played out wide in the past. He has played a bit deeper. Chelsea have been playing him as almost like a false 9. How do you think he'll fit into Arsenal's forward line?
So the good thing is he provides that depth because, again, like Timber, he's very, very versatile, as you say, and he can play as the number 10, the number 9. He can play on either wing. And we know that last season, the amount of games Arsenal had to play, someone like Saka, for example, definitely needed some time out of the team. Now, they added Trossard in January, which added a bit of depth. They've obviously got Nketiah around as well. So I actually wonder if Havertz is more going to cover the number 10 position, because you noticed a lot last season that Odegaard was always the one to get substituted. Even though he's the one that kind of has it in to unlock a team, it seemed that very often 70 minutes would hit, Odegaard would come off and Saka would stay on the pitch. So I wonder if actually he provides a bit of an option there. And I don't think it's in place of Odegaard. I think, for me, where I see Havertz fitting into this Arsenal team is the number 10 behind Jesus, and then dropping Odegaard deeper into the midfield. I don't think it makes sense. I've seen a lot of people talking about how Havertz might replace Xhaka and kind of play as that left-sided number 8. But actually, I think that suits Odegaard far more. I think his work rate off the ball enables him to kind of improve the defensive qualities of his game a lot more than someone like Havertz will. And also, like you mentioned, I think sometimes Arsenal's attack could be quite predictable. And it became a point where if a team managed to mark Odegaard out of the game, Arsenal couldn't create anything. But dropping him deeper and putting Havertz in that number 10 role gives the opposition something else to think about. And actually what you might find is if the opposition's holding midfielder is desperate to track Odegaard, he'll follow him deeper on the pitch. And that opens up a lot of space for Havertz to operate in with Jesus. So I feel like actually we've kind of questioned, well, who does Havertz replace? It could be Xhaka, but in a very different role. We might actually see Odegaard doing that. And I think Arsenal will do that a lot this summer. Some of the players that are moving on, I think they've already got answers for them in the squad. Thomas Partey moving on. Perhaps we see Ben White move into midfield, or perhaps Zinchenko, which I think is more likely. He becomes their holding midfielder, and they have Kieran Tierney at left back already, or maybe they improve. So they've got a lot of gaps to fill. But actually, because, like I mentioned earlier, Arteta's versatile squad, they can fill those gaps really quickly.
It's interesting, isn't it? You think about the kind of philosophy that Arteta's trying to impose on Arsenal. It's younger players, but again, like you say, it's this hallmark of versatility as well. And Dave, I think the players that they've been earmarking so far as being close to being completed, Havertz especially, Timber as well, their versatility, as Myles was saying, could be valuable to them, couldn't they? They're trying to close that gap with Manchester City. It's going to take a heck of a step up in quality, first of all, which these will undoubtedly be. But in terms of the way their team plays as well, it could change the shape quite a bit, couldn't it? It could offer freshness to a team, like we were saying, looked like you could pick itself at the end of the season.
Yeah, and I think that was the question last season, wasn't it? A lot. I think whether Arsenal can maintain that run that they were on, and if they did lose a couple of players through injury, would replacements be able to come into the team and obviously have the same performance levels that those are obviously the first 11. And I think we did see them struggle a little bit when they did lose a couple of players, which I think it's imperative that they've managed to get another centre back in. I think it'll be interesting to see if he's able to kind of cement a place in the first 11, considering how good Arsenal were with their 2 first choice centre backs last season. I don't think he'll push Saliba out of the first 11, so I think it will be a case of whether he is pushed into that second centre back position or whether he does actually operate on that right hand side. Obviously, let's not forget they've got Tommy Asso in there as well. I'm not sure if they'll probably be looking to move him on if Timber comes in and plays at fullback. But yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with Havertz. I think he got a lot of criticism last season, and I think some of it probably slightly unfair just because of how dysfunctional that Chelsea team was. We know he's a really good young talent, and we've seen him play some really good games. Obviously won the Champions League with Chelsea, and I feel like playing in this Arsenal team is going to be a completely different proposition altogether. The football that Arsenal play is so much better than what Chelsea play. They're a far more functional team. Like Myles was saying, he's going to be able to offer link-up play in a position potentially as a false 9 if Jesus isn't playing. And I think that sort of relationship that he'll be able to have with Saka and Martinelli, I think that will be really interesting to watch. But I think for me it is an interesting one because you don't know who he's going to displace, and I think that's quite an exciting problem to have, really. And it's something that Arteta will be able to obviously look at, and it'll be interesting to see what he does in pre-season, to see how he does kind of use him, and I suppose we'll see some answers when that happens.
Yeah, with Havertz as well. When I saw him playing for Leverkusen, it was his highlights reel in the Bundesliga was very much this dynamic forward that interchanged positions with other players of similar quality or better, created space for others, but he also needed others to create space for him. And I think in his last few months at Chelsea, that forward line was so static. There was no obvious goal threat. He had to become the goal threat, but there was no obvious service to him either. I think it was unfair on him to have that role when the team was so dysfunctional up front. Yeah. This Arsenal team is so much more different, isn't it, going forward?
I think one thing we have that we've not really seen from him of late is a lot of the goals I saw him score for Leverkusen. He was arriving into the box, kind of timing those runs in. And I don't feel like he's really been able to do that because of the way that Chelsea have actually played this, particularly the last year. They seem to really kind of camp teams into their own box, and they're not able to make those transitions as quickly as they would, whereas Arsenal are a completely different animal altogether. I feel like it's a team that's just going to suit his style of play so much better. And, hopefully we see sort of his old self, really. I think that's...
With Arsenal, though, with Arsenal, it was all about elevating the quality of, wasn't it, of the people that weren't necessarily starting, because when they were coming in to replace the obvious starters, it wasn't an immediate upgrade. It was a massive downgrade for the most part. But Havertz, wherever he starts or doesn't start, it means there's now depth, doesn't it, Myles? It means that there's now quality and depth. And I think it's a difficult gig for a player to sign for a club thinking I could potentially be a backup, isn't it? Do you think that's the case for some players if they do sign them, that they've got such an obvious, strong attacking team that anyone that does come in those positions is probably going to have to be backup to begin with?
It's funny, isn't it? Because in the attacking positions, we've seen a lot of clubs kind of have that mentality over the last couple of years where we've seen them sign players that you think you needed something else. We think of Tottenham spending big money on Richarlison last summer. Liverpool seem to have only refreshed their attacking line for the last 3 transfer windows. And there is a real thing about strengthening from a position of strength. That is a really good thing to do. And Arsenal, let's not forget, although they pushed Man City quite far in the league, they got knocked out of the Europa League to Sporting Lisbon and are now stepping up to the Champions League. So if they weren't quite good enough to cut it in the Europa League with the depth that they had last year, they obviously need to improve if they want to make their Champions League campaign even remotely successful. So it is really important that you encourage players. And I think the good thing is Arsenal have got an exciting enough project now that people will want to be a part of it. Yeah. Even if they're not guaranteed to start every single game, there's enough fixtures in that calendar that players will go there. What I wonder is the current youngsters at Arsenal, I wonder how they feel about it. Emile Smith-Rowe is back from injury, and we'll talk about him a bit later on, I'm sure, when we come to the England under-21s. But where does this leave him? Because that's another player that you think is above him in the pecking order. At the end of the season, when he got back to fitness, it was really hard for him to get minutes. Reece Nelson's just signed a new deal. Nketiah signed a deal last year. Balogun is back, which I imagine he'll move on. But there's a lot of players that were there that are looking at Havertz coming in and going, does that mean my future's not here? But it's a hard balance, and hopefully that's something Arteta will work on. I think it does seem like there's a lot more squad harmony at this Arsenal team than there has been over the last few years. So I trust him to manage it. But I think you've got to be impressed with Timber and Havertz if they come in, even if they weren't necessarily the priority positions. I'm just interested to see if that's all Arsenal do. Obviously, we know they want Declan Rice, but if they do for some reason miss out on him, then what? Do they readdress their strategy? Are there other players that they've been lined up for? Because it's gone very, very quiet on everyone but those three.
With Rice as well, if he was to come to Arsenal, he's probably one of the few players that would actually immediately upgrade that team as well. You know, he's such a high-quality player. And you said in our kind of deep dive onto Declan Rice's next move, how Man City would probably be the obvious destination in your eyes for a player to replace Ilkay Gundogan. So now he's actually gone to Barcelona. They're going to be looking for a player almost to fill such a huge hole that he provided for Man City. Rice seems to be a great like-for-like option for that, doesn't he? Because he can play box-to-box. But if he was to go for Arsenal, what would it take for him to go to Arsenal ahead of Man City? Do you think that it is purely just about, okay, this is more of a purer sporting ambition than Man City? Do you maybe that comes into it? Does money talk? Does pure ambition and drive come into it? What's Rice thinking right now, do you think?
I think the thing is, even though Man City have got the money, because they've got Guardiola, it's still sporting interests that move people to Man City. You obviously have the financial benefit, but right now, is there a club in European football that you'd rather play for than Man City? Yes, Arsenal play fantastic football, but if you're looking at the treble winners and Pep Guardiola's side, and you're going to have someone like Erling Haaland in front of you and De Bruyne to provide you with the ball when you need it, I don't think you can question whether someone would move to Man City for sporting reasons. I think you absolutely would. I think the only things that might draw someone to Arsenal instead are the excitement of being the challenger, the excitement of that young project that Arteta's trying to build. If you buy into Arteta's philosophy, then maybe you think they can challenge Man City in the coming years. Plus, for someone like Rice, he's London-based. That it's mental, but that does weigh into people's thinking, doesn't it? I think the fact that it would be a smoother transition, you don't really think of that as being an issue for people. When you see someone like Aaron Ramsey playing for Nice and his family still live in Cardiff, you think that it's kind of a given that a footballer would just go where they need to go. So, I don't know. There's still a glimmer for Arsenal. I think West Ham seem to be more keen to do business with them for some reason. And Man City still haven't put a concrete offer in. I wonder if because they're looking at Guardiola right now, and that would be the majority of their budget, and they've already brought Kovacic in for quite a reduced fee. I feel like Declan Rice is more, we're going for him now because if we don't get him now, we won't get him for a long time.
Yeah.
And we know he's someone we want for the future, rather than a player that they identified as that's our priority for this summer. But we've seen big clubs do that all the time. There was a period of time where Chelsea, and probably Man United actually, just signed anyone available in the Premier League to stop one of their rivals from getting them. And Declan Rice strengthens Arsenal. If Man City can bring him in, it's not like it would be detrimental to them.